The goal of discipleship has to be established in our minds before we can understand what healing and comforting is all about. And what is that goal of discipleship? According to what Paul said, it is Christ in you, the hope of glory, which, in case you're keeping track of other scriptures I'm giving you, is Colossians 1:27. So what I'm trying to do is to set up several scriptures to make a point about what this framework of discipleship is that we're working in. And namely, that's this. God creates human beings to bear His image. When sin and death enter the world through Adam, then that vocation is lost. Why? Because the image of God is distorted. So Christ, who is in the Bible called the second Adam, comes to restore that image by living a sinless life and offering Himself as what John in 1 John 2:2 calls the propitiation for our sins. And not for ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world. So, Christ comes to be able to, through His death and resurrection, create a way for God to dwell again in the human spirit. As He says in Revelation 3:20, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and I will eat with him and he with me." So, as we heard in our previous study, as we were talking about opening our homes, the first person who opens their home is Christ. Christ opens His home to us on earth and in heaven. And He comes to us through His messengers. And we're supposed to be always aware and opening our homes for His messengers who are seeking hospitality. And those who receive Him and those who don't are repaid accordingly. So there's a deep connection between salvation and hospitality, and as I'm about to show you, between salvation, hospitality, and healing. And we don't suddenly turn in a different direction to say, all right, now we're done with salvation and hospitality, now let's talk about healing. As we'll see through this month, healing and comforting has everything to do with hospitality. So follow with me here. Now that we've got all of these scriptures on the table, we're grounding healing and comforting in discipleship. So sin enters the world through Adam. Or to put it another way, Adam hosts sin. And as a result of that hospitality, which we call original sin, all human beings across all of history have hosted a lot of things that we were never designed or intended to host. There's a word for hosting what one is never designed to host. And that word is disease. So disease, sickness, and death are things that we normally don't think about as hospitality problems, but they are. And biblically, that's how they're classified. It's hard for us to understand in the New Testament when Jesus expels disease and sickness and illness from people. Often He does it with explicit reference to demons, and it just confuses modern people. But we need to understand this basic biblical truth, and then it'll make a lot more sense, which is that humans host disease and illness involuntarily. It is a result of original sin, of Adam and Eve hosting sin and illness and death voluntarily. So when we do it, it's not a natural process. It is a forced occupation. Sin, illness, and death occupy us, and that gradually incapacitates us physically and socially and spiritually. And ultimately, it's a fatal hosting. We all die. Noel Coward, who's a playwright, puts it like this. He says, "We live on a death-sentenced planet." So, if you remember these two principles about sickness and death, you'll understand the connection between salvation and hospitality and this subject that we're studying this month of healing and comforting. First, illness and death are understood biblically as forms of involuntary hosting. They are due to original sin. They are not natural parts of what it means to be human. Let me say that again. They are not natural parts of what it means to be human. So that's the first principle. And the second principle, illness and death are involuntarily hosted in every part of the human frame. Illness is physical, meaning it infects the body, but it is also social, which means it infects the soul, and it is spiritual, meaning it affects the spirit. But here is the good news. Christ's death and resurrection signal the eviction from the human form of sin and death. Christ is the true host, and he is also the true guest of every human being. You see, human beings are created from the beginning in order to be hosted by Christ on earth and to be hosted by Christ in heaven, and we are created to host him too. That's the cool part. We're created to host him in our spirits. And it's in our spirits that when we host him, that manifests itself through our soul and also in our bodies. And that's our calling. We bear his image into the world, and that is our purpose. So for Christians, the basic category for healing is not miracle. The basic category of healing is sign. You remember earlier we studied Jesus and the fishes and the loaves. And Jesus uses the word sign to refer to that rather than miracle. And remember, a sign is something that points towards something. And in this case, the sign of healing points towards hospitality being set right. Human beings hosting God in our human forms and bearing his image, because when we host him, we naturally bear his image. And this is all made possible because Christ first hosts us.
Hear the word, do the word. .w